Weapon frequency, or how often you see certain weapons in a round, and the percent chance that a weapon that you see in your encounter is X, is an important statistic that can allow us to understand exactly the variety of weapons being used, as well as what could possibly be considered a meta at that time. It is also important for us to consider if a meta is really strong or if it is weaker. If the weapon that is the most popularly used has a very high percent, then there's a strong argument to be made that the meta is too strong. If the meta that is being used has a very low percent, then it is more often than not a strong conclusion to make that the meta is fine and should be left alone. In today's video, I'm going to be addressing what I've found through weapon frequency, as well as what conclusions can be made from this. And I hope you all enjoy. Before I really get into this, I should just briefly explain how you gather this data. Very simple. You load into an encounter, you write down everybody's weapons, and then you're vibing. So, what can the data tell us? Well, first things first, let's talk about rarity data. From the rarity data, we are able to assess that 49% of all weapons brought out are white weapons. This is a minor downtick from last season where it was 51%, but nothing really major and is still around the same level as it was before. Green is now 8%, blue is 12%, which means together green and blue make up only 20% of all loadouts, which is just such a minor percent of the guns. Purple, on the other hand, has 22% of all weapons, which is quite high. And then gold has 9%. So that's what we can learn from the rarity chart. Very quickly, you can see that purple is still holding too much weight than it really should, and white is still occupying almost half of all loadouts. So now we can move on to the moving on to specific weapons, we can start with the most used weapon this season being the AKM. No surprise, as this was the same thing it was last season. The AKM is just quite a good weapon that can get into the hands of new players pretty easily. So you're going to see a lot of old players using it, like veterans who have decided that the AKM is pretty powerful because it is. And you're also going to have a lot of new players using it. This does not mean the AKM is overpowered. The AKM is just easier to acquire than the M16. If that's the main comparison, really, when we're talking about white ARs. The AKM is just easier to acquire. Its ammo is going to be easier to acquire because more guns use 7.62 by 54 as opposed to 5.56. And before someone interjects, 5.56, all of its weapons are purple, so a new player really isn't going to be getting the plans for those weapons for some decent amount of time. So it's safe to assume that an AKM is a more craftable weapon. Also, the AKM is more likely to spawn in weapon crates. These are all things that are going to make it a little bit more common than the M16. I do think a strong argument can be made, though, that the AKM should at least see some competition within other white weapons, such as the VZ58P and to varying degrees the Thompson. But it's not that this is the end of the world with the AKM. Next, we have the B93 Raffica making 8% of the weapon pool right now. This is also not surprising to me because this thing is a beast, one of the arguably strongest weapons in the game right now. It's white rarity, it's a secondary. These are all things that are perfect storm for a broken, overpowered weapon. And I think 8% honestly was a lot lower than I thought. I thought it would be the #1 most used weapon this season. It just wasn't. I don't really think anything can beat the AKM in usability. But yeah. It also has to be noted very quickly that it is the most used weapon ever in its initial season. No weapon in its initial season has ever seen this much use. Even SG, when it was initially brought out, was not anywhere near 8%. So that's just some food for thought. The next thing to look at, really, is our third place, which is tied between the M16 and the H-Bar, two 5.56s. These are both broken weapons, very much too powerful, the meta definers. On one hand, you have the M16, the 3-round burst, with very little bloom, very little recoil. It's pretty much a laser, high damage, 2 bursts to kill. Then you have the H-Bar, which is definitively the best gun in the game, with extremely long range, extremely low bloom, very low recoil, a sight, a 2-shot kill, full auto, and a 30-round 1-round mag. And the fact that this thing drops from safe and most lootable POIs. Your perfect storm for the most broken meta we've seen in quite a long time. An important thing to note here real quick is that the SG1 has noticeably dropped in percentages, now down to 5%. This is likely due to the fact that the SG1 is just not as good of a gun as the H-bar. That is now factual, now that the knowledge that H-bar is a two-shot is widespread. There's really no more argument that the H-bar is just better than the SG1, because it is. And not many people are going to be using the worst choice out of the two. But yeah, moving on to smaller numbers. I mean, again, we can take some quick notices here. Thompson's at 5, M21 and G3 at 3, BZ58P at 6. These are interesting statistics. ADR's at 4, so anyone who thinks the ADR meta is coming, I'm sorry, it just doesn't look like it's here yet. It could be coming. It does look like ADR is gaining in percentages as seasons go on, but it's definitely not here yet. Bugle 2%, that's another weapon that a lot of people have been looking out for, as in it could be a new meta raiser. The M60, another new weapon, is at 2%. That's not bad for a new weapon. That's kind of what I expected if the B93 was balanced, it would be at. But yeah, I mean, there's also a lot more diversity this season. 4 weapons that were never seen in any other season were first seen this season within the targeted pool. As opposed to only 2 weapons from last season not being seen this season. And I think one of the 2 weapons was the UK VZ59, which is quite sad that there was just 0 of those in this season's loot pool. But yeah, these are a lot of statistics to be thrown at you at once. If you want to, you can pause the video and look at the whole chart. But in conclusion, the meta is still here. It's very clearly still here with that 7% H-bar, 5% SG1. And AKM losing percentages. But the B93 is really the unexpected challenger of this season, and was the mad dog, the big thing to look your eyes out for. And it's going to be an interesting season to see next season, statistic-wise, where that 8% B93 goes, because the devs have already talked about the fact that B93 is getting some nerfs. My money, I mean, we're going to have to see how the cookie crumbles, but my initial guess is that we're going to see most B93 players jump to H-bar, if not all. Maybe a couple of them will jump to AKM M16, but I really don't think people, because think about this, the 93 Africa is strong enough that people are getting better gear and better loot. I don't see many people downgrading their weapon just because it gets more expensive. And I think most will run to the standard meta as opposed to these wildcard. I mean, we could see a tiny bit of a resurgence. B93 is kind of the same amount of recoil and boom as the Bugle, but Bugles are still pretty close. I don't see Bugle spiked yet. I do think Bugle and ADR spikes are in the future. I would, honestly, my money guess is going to be like 9.0 if the game is still kicking by then. Bugle and ADR are going to have a significant percentage because they are rising, just not enough to be a real first place at the moment. This has been Christopher Beast, and these were just my opinions on the statistics. You can look at the statistics yourself and get your own conclusions. I will be doing this next season to see really the change. I want to see how the B93 affects things, and see you all next time.